Who said that the history of Africa was only written by kings and warriors? There were queens, warriors, scientists, revolutionaries. Pan-Africanism, this political and cultural movement born from resistance to slavery and colonization, has often been narrated by male voices: Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Thomas Sankara. But behind these emblematic figures, women have carried the torch of freedom, dignity, and African unity. This course will deconstruct stereotypes. It will show that Pan-Africanism is for everyone, boys and girls, and that it was built thanks to the relentless struggle of women like Yera Santwe, the Queen Mother of the Ashanti, who led a war against the British in 1900 to protect the sacred throne of the Ashanti people. Or Nzinga, Queen of Ndongo and Matamba, present-day Angola, who resisted the Portuguese in the 17th century, using diplomacy and war. Later, in the 20th century, women like Wangari Maathai, Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2004, linked ecology and democracy by planting trees and fighting against dictatorship in Kenya. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first female president of an African country, Liberia, 2006, embodied the African Renaissance after years of civil war. These female figures are not exceptions. They are proof that Pan-Africanism is an inclusive movement, which has always needed women to move forward. In this course, we will explore the origins of Pan-Africanism, its evolution, its great female figures, and how it continues to inspire contemporary struggles for justice, equality, and dignity. We will also understand why the traditional narrative has often erased women, and how we can rewrite this history more fairly. Get ready for a journey through time and space, from pre-colonial Africa to the diasporas, through Pan-African congresses and independencies. This course is an invitation to think about Pan-Africanism differently, with a fresh, inclusive, and feminist perspective. SEP First Part, The Origins of Pan-Africanism and the Place of Women in African Resistance. Pan-Africanism was not born in the 20th century in the intellectual salons of London or Paris. It has deep roots in pre-colonial African societies. Before the slave trade, Africa was a continent of kingdoms and empires where women often played political and military roles. Take the example of the Ghana Empire, Mali, Songhai, or the Congo Kingdom. In these societies, women could be queens, advisors, warriors. Queen Nzinga, 1583 to 1663, is an emblematic case. Daughter of the King of Ndongo, she learned to read and write in Portuguese, which allowed her to negotiate with the colonizers. In 1624, she became queen and led an armed resistance against the Portuguese who wanted to expand their slave trade.
Idle diplomat. The transatlantic slave trade, 15th to 19th century, devastated Africa, but it also created an African diaspora in the Americas, where slaves preserved traditions, languages, and religions. On the plantations, enslaved women played a key role in transmitting African culture. They were the keepers of stories, songs, and dances. They also participated in revolts. The Saint-Domingue Revolt, 1791–1804, which led to Haiti's independence, included women like Sanite Belair, a heroine who fought alongside Toussaint Louverture. These women of the diaspora laid the foundations of modern Pan-Africanism. In the 19th century, African-American intellectuals like Martin Delany and Edward Wilmot Blyden began to theorize a return to Africa, a renaissance of African civilization. But women were not absent from this movement. Maria Stewart, a free black woman from the United States, was one of the first to deliver public speeches on the rights of black people and women in the 1830s. She said that black women should be the educators of the race. This link between Pan-Africanism and feminism is old. In 1893, the Congress of Black Women in Chicago, organized by Ida B. Wells and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, highlighted the double oppression of black women, both racial and sexist. This Congress was a precursor to the great Pan-African Congresses of the 20th century. In 1900, Henry Sylvester Williams, a lawyer from Trinidad, organized the first Pan-African Congress in London. Among the participants were women like Anna Julia Cooper, an American educator and activist. Cooper wrote a famous book, A Voice from the South, 1892, where she argued that the education of black women is the key to the progress of the entire race. She said, "Only when the black woman is elevated will the black race be elevated." This first Pan-African Congress laid the foundations for subsequent Congresses, but history has often remembered the names of men like Dubois, forgetting the women who were present. It is time to restore historical truth. Women have always been at the heart of Pan-Africanism, as theorists, activists, and educators. Second part, the Pan-African Congresses of the 20th century and the emergence of female leaders. The Pan-African movement was structured through a series of congresses held in major Western and African cities. The Second Pan-African Congress took place in 1919 in Paris, initiated by W.E.B. Du Bois. It aimed to influence the negotiations of the Treaty of Versailles to include the rights of colonized peoples. Among the delegates were women like the Jamaican activist Amy Ashwood Garvey, who was also the first wife of Marcus Garvey. Amy
and encouraged women to engage in the movement. Marcus Garvey himself created a women's section of the UNIA called Black Cross Nurses, which provided health care to Black communities. Women were thus pillars of the organization. The Third Pan-African Congress was held in 1923 in London and Lisbon, but it was less significant. In contrast, the Fourth Congress in 1927 in New York saw strong participation from women like Mary McLeod Bethune, an African-American educator who founded a school for Black girls in Florida. Bethune was an advisor to President Franklin Roosevelt and campaigned for civil rights and education. The Fifth Pan-African Congress in 1945 in Manchester is considered the most important. It brought together leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, George Padmore, but also women like the Trinidadian activist Claudia Jones. Claudia Jones, although born in Trinidad, spent most of her life in the United States and England. She was a committed communist, deported in 1955 for her political activities. She founded the newspaper, the West Indian Gazette, and was one of the first to speak about intersectionality, the intersection of racism, sexism, and capitalism. She said that Black women were the most exploited in the capitalist system. This Manchester Congress adopted a resolution calling for the immediate independence of African colonies. But women were not only in congresses. They were on the ground, in national liberation movements. Take the example of Kenya. The Mau Mau movement, 1952 to 1960, saw massive participation of Kikuyu women. They were fighters, messengers, suppliers of food and care. One of the most famous is Muthoni wa Karima, a female warrior who was one of the few women to be named general in the Mau Mau army. She survived the war and was decorated after independence. In Algeria, women played a crucial role in the War of Independence, 1954 to 1962. Activists like Jamal Abu Hayred and Jamal Abu Pacha were tortured by the French army, but they became symbols of resistance. Today, we are only beginning to recognize their role. The Pan-Africanism of the independences, 1950s-1970 saw the emergence of female leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, but also women like the Ghanaian Mabel Dove, a journalist and activist who was the first woman elected to the Parliament of Ghana, and she fought for women's rights and independence. It is essential to remember that women were not just assistants, but full political actors. SCP Third Part, The Era of Independences and Pan-Africanism in the Feminine, from Yaa Asantewaa to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. The struggle for the independence of African countries was marked by powerful female figures, often neglected in textbooks. Why?
Delivered a famous speech. Now I see that some of you are afraid to fight for our king. If you men do not want to fight, then we women will. I will call my fellow women to fight the white men. She then led a war for several months against the British, who eventually captured her and exiled her to the Seychelles. But her courage inspired generations of Ghanaians. Today, a statue of her stands in Kumasi. In the 20th century, other women marked history. In Egypt, Huda Sha'rawi, 1879 to 1947, was a pioneer of Arab and Pan-African feminism. She founded the Egyptian Feminist Union in 1923 and campaigned for Egypt's independence and women's rights. She also participated in Pan-African congresses. In South Africa, the fight against apartheid was carried by women like Winnie Mandela, but also by lesser-known activists like Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Joseph, and Albertina Sisulu. In 1956, they organized the March of 20,000 women to Pretoria to protest against the pass laws imposed on black women. Their slogan was, Strijdom, you have touched the women, you have struck a rock. Apartheid fell in 1994, and South Africa elected Nelson Mandela, but women continued to fight for equality. In Liberia, civil war devastated the country. It was there that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, an economist trained at Harvard, was elected president in 2006, becoming the first female head of state in Africa. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her work in reconstruction and peace promotion. She said, "If your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough." Her leadership showed that women can lead nations and rebuild societies. In Rwanda, after the 1994 genocide, women played a key role in reconciliation. Today, Rwanda has the highest percentage of female parliamentarians in the world, over 60. Paul Kagame promoted gender equality as a pillar of development. This is no coincidence. Rwandan women were pillars of reconstruction. Modern Pan-Africanism cannot ignore these successes. It must integrate the gender question as central. Because African unity will only be real if it includes women at all levels. The African Union, founded in 2002, created a protocol on women's rights, the Maputo Protocol, 2003, which recognizes gender equality and women's rights to health, education, and political participation. But much remains to be done. African women are still underrepresented in governments and Pan-African institutions. The fight continues. SEP 4th part, Contemporary Pan-Africanism, Challenges and Perspectives for Women and Inclusion. Today, Pan-Africanism faces new challenges: globalization, economic inequalities, climate change, armed conflicts, and pandemics. But African women are on the front lines of these struggles. Wangari Maathai, 1940–2011, is a perfect example.
Women are the first to suffer from environmental degradation because they are responsible for water, firewood, and food. In 2004, she received the Nobel Peace Prize for her action. She also campaigned against the dictatorship of Daniel Arap Moi in Kenya, which led to her being imprisoned and beaten. But she never gave up. Her struggle shows that Pan-Africanism must include ecology and gender justice. In Nigeria, movements like Bring Back Our Girls, launched after the kidnapping of 276 schoolgirls by Boko Haram in 2014, showed the strength of women in the fight for education and security. Activist Obiageli Ezekwesili, former Minister of Education, was one of the strongest voices of this movement. She also ran for the presidency of Nigeria in 2019, breaking a taboo. In South Africa, the Fees Must Fall movement, 2015 to 2016, saw students like Naledi Chirwa and Nompendulome Kartshwa lead protests against tuition fees and racial inequalities in education. These young women are the heirs of Pan-Africanism. They use social media, arts, and music to spread their ideas. The Afropunk Festival, for example, celebrates Black and inclusive culture. Pan-Africanism today is no longer only political, it is also cultural, digital, and feminist. Artists like Beyoncé, with her album Black is King, 2020, or Nigerian singer Yemi Alade, who sings Africa in several languages, participate in this renewal. Writers like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, author of Americana and We Should All Be Feminists, are powerful voices reminding us that feminism is African and that Africa must be narrated by women. Adichie said, "The problem with history is that it is told by the victor. But the voice of African women must be heard." Inclusive Pan-Africanism must also open up to LGBTQ+ issues, long taboo in Africa. Activists like Bisi Alimi in Nigeria, or Kenyan Achinga Nyong'o, campaign for the rights of queer people in Africa. They remind us that Pan-Africanism must embrace all identities. The African Union adopted a resolution in 2016 to protect the rights of LGBTQ+ people, but it is far from being implemented. The challenges are immense, but African women are resilient. They invent new forms of activism, solidarity, and creation. The Pan-Africanism of tomorrow will be feminist or it will not be. SEP in-depth section, Advanced Reflection Paths on Pan-Africanism and Gender. To go further, it is essential to understand the African feminist theories that enrich Pan-Africanism. African feminism is not a copy of Western feminism. It has its own roots and concepts. Nigerian writer Oyeranko Yumi, in her book The Invention of Women, 1997, explains that in pre-colonial Yoruba societies, gender was not as rigid a social category as in Western societies. Women cowl.
Also about liberating the categories of thought that colonialism imposed. Another important theorist is Ife Amadium, author of Male Daughters, Female Husbands, 1987, which shows that in Igbo society, Nigeria, there were flexible gender roles such as male daughters, women who could inherit property and play male role, and female husbands, women who could take wives to start a family. These examples show that pre-colonial Africa was diverse and inclusive. Pan-Africanism must therefore reclaim this history to build a more egalitarian future. The concept of intersectionality, developed by American legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, is also crucial. It shows that oppressions of race, class, and gender intersect. Black women experience a specific reality that cannot be reduced to either racism alone or sexism alone. Pan-African activists like Claudia Jones had already understood this in the 1950s. Today, movements like Black Lives Matter will integrate this perspective. BLM was founded by 3 black women, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. The movement has ramifications in Africa, notably in Nigeria with the End SARS movement, 2020, against police violence. These struggles are interconnected. Contemporary Pan-Africanism must also address the issue of reparations for slavery and colonization. Women like Barbadian Vereen Shepherd, historian and activist, have advocated for financial and symbolic reparations. In 2013, CARICOM, Caribbean Commune, launched a commission for reparations, chaired by Shepherd. She says, women were doubly victimized by slavery, both as workers and as sexual objects. Reparations must include a gender dimension. Finally, it is important to reflect on the place of women in Pan-African institutions. The African Union has a Pan-African Parliament, but women are not sufficiently represented there. Organizations like Femmes Africa Solidarite, EFA, work to strengthen women's participation in peace and security. In 2000, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which recognizes the role of women in conflict prevention. African women have been key actors in peace processes, for example in Liberia with Lema Bowie, who organized women's sit-ins to end the civil war. She received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 along with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. These examples show that Pan-Africanism is a living movement, constantly evolving, and that women are indispensable actors in it. Specific methods and tips for understanding and remembering. To memorize this course well, here are some techniques. First, create a timeline of the major dates of Pan-Africanism including women. 4.
AI, etc. Note their country, their action, a quote. Use mnemonic devices, for example, Nzinga negotiates with the Portuguese, Nzinga equals negotiation. Watch documentaries about these women, there are films about Asantewaa or Wangari Maathai. Discuss in class or in groups, what could feminist Pan-Africanism bring to today's society? Finally, practice with the QCM below. And remember, history is written by those who have power. By learning the history of African women, you contribute to rebalancing the narrative. SEP to go further, readings, references, and open questions. Recommended readings: Women and the Pan-African Movement by Hakeem Adi, 2018, a book exploring the role of women in Pan-African congresses. The Invention of Women by Oyeranko Yumi, 1997, to understand gender in Africa. We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, 2014, a short and powerful essay. Unbowed by Wangari Maathai, 2006, her autobiography. Films: The Women of the Mau Mau, documentary, Asantewaa, the Great Warrior Queen, Ghanaian film. Websites: The African Union website, O.in has a section on women's rights. The Wangari Maathai Foundation website. Open questions for reflection: How can Pan-Africanism integrate LGBTQ+ demands? Should reparations for slavery include a gender dimension? How can African women use social media to promote Pan-Africanism? Why are women often erased from historical narratives? What can a high school student do to promote inclusive Pan-Africanism? These questions are avenues for presentations or class debates.